We are currently watching one of the craziest United States elections of all time unfold before our eyes, and I'm sure you're aware of it. The media has been blasting pictures of Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton's face all over TV and news websites for the last 9 months. It is certainly entertaining in a theatrical way. The prospect of the first woman president, a political revolution, or maybe just the chance to hear Donald Trump speak for the next 4 years is fascinating to many people in America. But in this presentation, I'm not going to focus on the who of the situation. I'm going to focus on the how and the why. To elaborate on what I mean, let me tell you about the situation that made me curious in the subject. It has to do with my bias. I am a Canadian citizen, as most of you guys know, and therefore cannot vote in the U.S. elections. As a result, I have looked at the presidential race more analytically. Early on into the election process, I decided I was going to support the most liberal candidate. I couldn't understand why more of the general population didn't support this candidate. It seemed to me that this candidate stood for what the general population supported. But later on, other candidates started gathering support that seemed to go against the population's ethical beliefs, so I was naturally confused. From this, the questions of how and why came to be. The knowledge question that came out of those initial questions is, to what extent does one have to follow society's ethical beliefs in order to be successful in a democratic political system? My area of knowledge for this presentation is ethics, and the way of knowing is intuition. So a good first step to investigate this question is through political scandals, specifically the ones that do not deal with illegal actions. We want those that go against common ethical beliefs and took place in times when their political careers could be affected. This means no Bill Clinton or Richard Nixon. A good example of a scandal that fits this description is one of Anthony Weiner, a congressman from New York. In short, he sent a lot of indecent photos of himself to women that were not his wife. This came to the public's attention in 2 different circumstances over 2 years. The first time this happened was when he was still a congressman. He didn't do anything that inherently affects the way he did his job in the House of Representatives, but because of this unethical behavior, there was a large amount of outcry for him to resign. One poll showed that only 41% of voters in his district thought he should continue as congressman. He ended up resigning, but that wasn't the end of his political career, or the scandal. While he was the frontrunner in the 2013 New York City election for mayor, a similar situation occurred involving another woman. His polling numbers dropped, and he was pressured to stop campaigning, although it was by his own doing. In both cases, Weiner's political career was damaged because of unethical behavior. This sort of thing happens all the time in politics. In one instance, it came to the public's attention that the Secretary of Agriculture, Earl Butz, in 1974 told a dirty joke about the Pope having sex with a dog, and as a result got pushed out of office with this. So from these examples, you may have already thought of an answer for our knowledge question. To what extent does one have to follow society's ethical beliefs in order to be successful in a democratic political system? You're probably thinking the answer is a large extent, and that's partially right. The nature of democracy is that popular opinion survives over less agreeable stances. However, the reality of it is a little bit more complicated. Let's take a look at the politicians who try too hard to be in line with our ethical beliefs. This is called political pandering. It is when a political candidate switches their political views based on popular opinion in order to benefit themselves. To demonstrate this, let's look at a hypothetical example. I do this because I do not want to show bias towards certain politicians or a certain political party. In this example, a politician's approval rating is falling dramatically. To counteract this collapse in approval, this politician releases a statement in support of a bill to help veterans. The problem with this is that simple support is not the same as helping the cause the citizens want. The only immediate effect of this is that they are able to save their approval rating from falling. Political pandering creates the illusion of parallel ethical beliefs instead of actual compatibility in ethics with the public. Therefore, through intuition, we can determine that a politician's ethical beliefs do not have to correspond with those of the people. In order to be successful, a politician only has to make it look like they support the same issues as the people. Before we can take this information about the research question back to the original 2016 election situation, we must look at another factor. How can we determine what popular ethical beliefs are? It is easy for us Northerners and young people to say that common ethical beliefs are LGBT rights, education for all, separation of church and state, or pro-choice abortion laws, but that is ignorant to other demographics or areas around the country. People in areas like the Deep South might not agree with all those beliefs that I just stated are ethical. It may be difficult to consider, but we have to deal with the fact that perhaps our own ethical beliefs are not under the umbrella of society's ethical beliefs. So now let's take all this back to the original example of the 2016 election. In 2016, about 40% of voters considered themselves part of the Democratic Party. In contrast, 35% of them considered themselves Republicans. Independents take up the remaining 25%. If we split the independents up according to the ratio of Democrats and Republicans, we can make the assumption that the majority of people are in agreement with Democratic policies. So with this majority, we can also make the assumption that most people will side with the Democratic ethical beliefs or are moderates. The first question that comes to mind is, then why is Trump winning? Well, he's not actually. When comparing his votes to those of the Democrats in the primaries, he only wins some states in the South. Again, it comes down to geographic location. Communities of white people near the Mexican border may have strong feelings about immigration. Conservative Southern communities may have strong views against gay marriage. Evangelical Christian communities may be scared of Muslims. You get the point. The ethical beliefs that Trump has are supported in locations where those beliefs are commonplace. The same can be said about all the other candidates. Ted Cruz with evangelical Christians, Sanders with the middle class, Hillary Clinton with older, upper-class people. You get the general point about geography. Answering the knowledge question is more complicated when you look at who didn't get many votes. For example, George Pataki. He used to be the governor of New York. And a lot of you probably don't know it, but he was running for president this year in the Republican primaries. He was a social liberal with a conservative economic plan. By all definitions, he applied to the majority of ethical beliefs stated earlier. So why in the height of his candidacy was he polling at 1.1%? By all ethical considerations, he is considered the most in line with mainstream ethical beliefs in the Republican Party. In a similar vein, the Democratic candidate Martin O'Malley was in line with society's ethical standards and even offered an option for a more moderate candidate, but was not successful at achieving success in the primaries or the polls. This can be attributed to moderation. Moderation is a concept that many American voters do not do well with. Moderation implies compromise of voters' ethical beliefs. For many voters, ethical beliefs are considered sacred and should not be wavered to fit specific candidates. The lack of acceptance for moderates also stems from a political theory called the golden mean fallacy. It is the assumption that two radically differing viewpoints can always come up with a solution through compromise. In actuality, nothing gets done, and both parties are left dissatisfied with the outcome. If you think gay marriage is inherently wrong, it is hard to compromise with someone who thinks it is against ethical standards to limit the freedom of gay people. Another reason that Pataki or O'Malley may not have gathered support is because of the growing partisan divide in the United States. In short, Democrats have been becoming more liberal and Republicans have been becoming more conservative over the last 15 years. It is less common for voters to switch parties anymore. So let's go back to our original knowledge question. To what extent does one have to follow society's ethical beliefs in order to be successful in a democratic political system? So now we can come up with a suitable answer from everything that we discussed. The answer is a large extent with limited opposition. People want to vote for politicians who agree with their ethical viewpoints. Beliefs like don't cheat on your wife, gay marriage, help veterans, etc. Someone who supports liberal ethical beliefs finds it easier to vote for Sanders instead of Ted Cruz, who opposes these views. The counterpoint to this is that politicians can lie about what they stand for, or they could just not do anything about what they said they stood for when they finally achieve office.